when my main man, Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated senior NBA writer, boxing commentator and analyst for DAZN, host the Boxing with Chris Mannix podcast on the Volume. When my main man, Chris Mannix, isn't covering the NBA and even the boxing world, he's a legend in 2 games. He is co-starring opposite Michael B. Jordan in Creed 3. First and foremost, I got to tell you how much I just love seeing you in Creed 3. Every time I watch that movie, I beam with such pride. Look at my dog. I mean, that is so big time, man. And we'll get into your story, your origin story, which is incredible, your success story. We go back 2 decades now, man. You haven't aged a bit, but it's really good to see you, man. You in L.A., thank you for waking up with me after what had to be quite the night as the Nuggets swept the Lakers out of the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, it was a wild night, watching what was a vintage LeBron James performance on Monday night. And then after the game, you have LeBron, dropping hints that he may be done. Now, we could debate whether or not that's a reaction to an exhausting season. It could be him simply just wanting to exert some leverage against the Lakers to do whatever the hell he wants in the offseason. But, as big a story as it is, as Denver making the first finals in franchise history, it was eclipsed after the game with LeBron suggesting that he could retire before the start of next season.
And I do want to start there with you, Chris, because when LeBron's final shot was blocked, honestly, the first thought that went through my mind was, I wonder if that's the last shot I'll ever take. And then post-game, when he starts to volunteer answers to questions that he was not asked. He was asked the most neutral, like, hey, how would you evaluate this season? And he went on to volunteer that he had a lot to think about. That was stunning. That was very, very jarring to hear, because even though he's almost 39 years old, retirement is just not something that's been in the air when it comes to LeBron James. Obviously, still playing at a high level. You mentioned the game he had last night, 40, 10, and 9 in 48 minutes, slowed down in the second half. 29, 8, and 7 this season, and another all-NBA season. Just didn't feel like, this could be it for LeBron. There was no talk about it whatsoever. And obviously, there's the Bronny James of it all. Yeah. Son's going to USC. Had said previously that he wants to play with Bronny James. We'll get back to that in a second. But just to the point about the leverage, I want to focus on that for a second. I'm skeptical, as we all have to be as journalists, but I'm not necessarily cynical. The idea that he wants attention or is exerting more leverage than he already possesses over the Los Angeles Lakers. Can you speak more to those two? Because I don't necessarily buy into those. Or is there something to both of those angles?
Well, historically, LeBron has used his contracts to exert as much leverage as possible on his teams. If you look back at his second go-around with Cleveland, it was a series really of short-term and ultimately one-year contracts that were made in part to ensure that the Cavaliers went all in every single offseason to improve that roster, that they sacrificed whatever short-term, whatever long-term issues they may have for short-term success, which made his decision last offseason to sign a one-year extension with the Lakers so surprising. You understand kind of nominally why he did it. By signing that extension, he took off the table the talking point of would LeBron walk in the offseason. It became theoretically less of a distraction, but it also took away some of LeBron's leverage. And he's always applied that leverage whenever given the chance. So when I hear LeBron sitting up there, when I see LeBron sitting up there and I hear him, as you said, volunteering answers, not asked about, kind of his basketball future. In fact, multiple times during that press conference, his basketball future was assumed. He was under contract for next year. Of course, he would be back. But in the very last answer to the very last question, which had nothing to do about his future, he said he had a lot to think about this offseason. And not coincidentally, immediately afterwards, you saw Chris Haynes issue what was obviously a pre-written report about LeBron and his future. He later spoke to Dave McMenamin, who he's known for years, about, kind of having a lot to think about, was a little more clear with what he said there. So, this just strikes me, Mike, as, LeBron putting this into the universe in large part because he wants to make sure that next season he gets everything he wants from the Los Angeles Lakers.
And that's fascinating to me. So a couple of things. The Haynes report, and man, in our business, nothing is accidental. We're very intentional and precise with our words. It said, may not be back with the Lakers next season, and retirement is under consideration. Okay, so it was like it was specific to the fact that he may not be with the Lakers. By the way, who he has a 24-25 player option with. Anyway, the thing that's always fascinated me about LeBron, though, and I know there was a lot of frustration at various points about hey, give the Nets whatever they need for Kyrie Irving, F them picks, more or less. You know what I mean? But it fascinates me that a LeBron James, a player of his standing, would need to go out of his way to exert additional leverage at this stage of his career, the way he's still playing. There's still a contender. Obviously, he came out of nowhere, or came from the abyss to be a contender this year. But the fact that he feels the need to do that, why? Am I being naive that is necessary?
Well, I think it is necessary because one of the outstanding questions that the Lakers will have this offseason is how aggressive will they pursue Kyrie Irving? And there's a thinking amongst people that know LeBron that LeBron wants to play with Kyrie Irving. And watching that series unfold with Denver, you saw LeBron have just Herculean performance after Herculean performance. Anthony Davis had, an off game too, but he was pretty good for most of the series and good defensively for virtually all of it. D'Angelo Russell was not. D'Angelo Russell couldn't make a shot in this series. And when D'Angelo Russell can't make a shot, he has no value whatsoever because he's a below average defensive player. So my immediate thought goes to Kyrie Irving and how badly does LeBron want the Lakers to make it happen? I think all things considered, if the Lakers front office were left to its own devices, they wouldn't go to the mat for Kyrie Irving, in part because signing him would require them to gut their roster, most likely, of some of the guys they picked up before the trade deadline, specifically Rui Hachimura, maybe also D'Angelo Russell. These are guys the Lakers gave up real Austin capital Reeves to go out and they got to sign Austin Reeves as well, which would explode their payroll. But more about the guys that they acquired before the trade deadline, guys that were pretty instrumental in their second half of the season success. So they'd have to do that. Yeah. And look, Kyrie Irving's not coming to LA on a 1-year deal. He's not coming on a 2-year deal. He's going to get between a 3 or a 4-year deal at close to max dollars from the Dallas Mavericks. That offer is going to be on the table come July 1st. So for the Lakers to extract him from that situation, they're going to have to go all in as well. And look, if you're Rob Pelinka and you're Jeannie Buss, it's understandable to be reluctant to go all in on a player as unreliable as Kyrie Irving. So in my mind, in my mind, I'm thinking that, this is a way for LeBron to really press the Lakers here, to say, look, all right, what I want. And if what I want is Kyrie Irving, I better get it, or else you can go into next season with Anthony Davis and a bunch of role players and enjoy your trip to the lottery in 2024. Look, as you said, there's nothing accidental with LeBron James. He is as calculated as any athlete in the game today. And if this is a leverage play, it's an understandable and unsurprising one to make.
For sure. And just to be clear, and you answered my question, I may not have asked it as precisely as I should have. You answered my question. I'm not being naive to LeBron's desires, but you would think that the Lakers and LeBron's desires would be in alignment. Now, maybe they have different ways about of going about getting to the same destination. But, LeBron doesn't have forever to play, even though he seems to be, he seems to have father time on the ropes. But you would think that the Lakers would want the same thing. But to your point, Chris, they may not want it in the same ways and via the same means, such as, going all in on a Kyrie Irving. What about a Trae Young? I saw a report from The Athletic this morning that they've had internal discussions about a hypothetical trade offer. I mean, do you see them, whether it's Kyrie Irving or maybe a Trae Young, do you see them being super aggressive if let's say this leverage play works and, LeBron's in either like, hey, I'm not trying to just get to the Western Conference Finals. I'm trying to contend for a championship. Are you with this program or not? If not, I'm out. If this works and it gets the Lakers' attention, do you see them being aggressive? And if not, will they do it at the cost of calling LeBron's bluff?
I see them being aggressive, unquestionably. I don't know if Trae Young is the answer. Trae is a dynamic scorer, but his stock has plummeted over the last couple of years. His shot making has diminished, especially from the three-point line. The player we saw help the Hawks advance to the conference finals a couple of years ago, he's been a lesser version of that, and he has his own defensive problems out there. And look, LeBron doesn't have the familiarity with Trae Young that he has with Kyrie Irving. He knows that he can win a championship with Kyrie Irving as his co-star because he's done that already. And Kyrie, at his best, is still an elite all-NBA level talent. What it's going to come down to, Mike, is, look, LeBron doesn't give a damn what happens to the Lakers after the 23-24 season. Let's just be real. Like, he doesn't. Like, this is...
No, that's why he wanted the picks traded.
He wants a chance. Yeah, he wants a chance to win a championship next year. And after next year, if he still wants to play basketball, he's probably going to go wherever Bronny winds up playing. If he's drafted, he'll want to go and play for that organization. He has been very clear about that multiple times. The Lakers have to think about life after LeBron, and they have to think about the cost of tying yourself to Kyrie Irving over a long-term deal. A player that, look, if we're being honest, he blew up a championship-level situation in Cleveland by requesting a trade. He was part of the toxicity in Boston that led to that team dramatically underachieving in his last year. He blew up a potential championship situation in Brooklyn because he didn't want to, he wasn't getting the contract offer that he wanted from the Nets. And look, he was a good soldier in Dallas. People down there have told me that a lot, a good guy in the locker room, but he wants a max level deal from the Mavericks. And if I'm the Lakers, how do I do that? How do I trust this guy, beyond one season with LeBron James? So it's going to be an interesting tug of war, I think, this offseason.
And even if LeBron could, even if LeBron could, I don't want to say control Kyrie. I don't want to say that Kyrie's a grown man. Even if LeBron could bring out the best in Kyrie, that's going to be the Lakers' problem once LeBron walks. So they're like, yeah, that's nice if you just want to run it with him for 1 year, but what happens when you leave? Now we are stuck with Kyrie Irving. But to the point about Bronny, so I'm not sure if you saw this, Chris. I know it's early and you were up late. Part of the conversation with Dave McMenamin, he said the following. He said, this is from Saturday. This is after Game 3. He said, I've done what I've had to do in this league, and my son is going to take his journey. And however his journey lays out, he's going to do what's best for him. And as his dad and his mom, Savannah, and his brother and sister, we're going to support him whatever he decides to do. So just because that's my aspiration or my goal doesn't mean it's his. And I'm absolutely okay with that. So we talked about the leverage with the Lakers part. That's if he wants to play. But now let's talk about the reality of the fact that maybe he was being sincere, because I'm with you. Like, I thought, okay, is it frustration? Is it exhaustion? Is it pain from the foot that's continued to bother him? It's like, maybe that's just in the moment. He can't really be serious, right? But if playing with Bronny is not his end-all, be-all the way we all believe it to be, and he's going on 39 years old, like, could he be serious about this? Could he be serious? Like, nobody seems to really believe him, that it's either attention, it's either leverage, or just in the moment emotion. But what if he's serious? How likely is it that he's actually serious about walking away?
Look, he's played 20 NBA seasons, spent more than half his life playing NBA basketball, and this was an exhausting season, both mentally because of all the stuff that was going on at the start of the season, physically with one of the most significant injuries, maybe the most significant injury he suffered during his career happening at midseason, and then the toll of having to strap this team on his back and succeed in the playoffs, with playing at that kind of level. But I just can't wrap my arms around the idea that he'd actually walk away. He's playing basketball at too high a level. I mean, if he had scuffled to the finish line this year, if he had struggled in game 4, missed a bunch of shots, all that, maybe I'd buy it. But he had one of the great performances of his playoff career. He had 31 points in the first half. He's never done that before in a playoff game. He's breaking his own records even now at 38 years old. I just can't see a player as competitive as LeBron James is walking away from that. One of the other pieces of what Haynes reported was that he said he wasn't sure, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. He said he wasn't sure he'd be ready at the start of the season. So could we see LeBron, skip out on training camp a little bit, take some pre-approved time off? We've seen it before in other sports, where stuff like that happens. Could we see LeBron play a scaled back version of this NBA calendar? I think it's unlikely because whoever's on this Lakers roster, it's going to be important for LeBron to be in training camp and to start to develop chemistry with this team early on. But maybe we see the Lakers make some concessions when it comes to playing time and the amount of games LeBron has to play in order to get him back in the fold. That's one possibility. But ultimately, Mike, I just believe when push comes to shove, LeBron is going to get what he wants from this front office and free agency, and he will be in camp with the Lakers in the fall.
So let's put a percentage on it. Percentage chance that he actually walks away.
5% in my mind. Okay.
Because the other scenario, and I was kicking this around last night, I've seen some other people throw this out, is does he, given what you just said and what we just saw in terms of how he played this season, and even at going on 39 years old, how good he still is, maybe he takes a sabbatical. Like retirement doesn't have to mean done. So does he take the year off and then come back to play with Bronny? Is another possibility. Like even if he walks away, could he do the Michael Jordan thing, and fax us a message that he's back, because it's not like he's finished. And that brings me to, I think, my last question for you about LeBron is if this isn't it, and I think another reason why we were like, man, is he really going to walk away so suddenly? Because he hasn't had his farewell tour. There hasn't been this build-up toward it. He hasn't had any interviews talking about the end and seeing the end. This is like, if this is it, or if this isn't it, I beg your pardon, how do you see him going out? Have you envisioned the way that he leaves the game? Does he ride off into the sunset if he's able to win a 5th championship? Does he announce it at the beginning of the season that this is it for me? And does he get rocking chairs and gifts at every stop along the way? Like how does LeBron James walk away? Because it's not like he's declining right now. Or he's not significantly declining. Let me amend that.
No, look, he's declined, but he's declined to the point where he's a top 15 player as opposed to being a top 5 player, which is still a remarkable feat for a player at his age. My feeling on how LeBron will go out, because he's not going to go out as a significantly diminished version of himself. He's not going to go out as a 7th man on the bench. You're not going to see LeBron compete for 6th man of the year awards like a Jamal Crawford and go out that way. My feeling on how he goes out is that he plays next season with the Lakers. And then the next year, if Bronny gets drafted and winds up in the NBA, whether he announces it or not, wherever he plays that year will be his farewell year. Look, he has been so consistent over the last couple of years about his desire to play with his son. Once he recognized that his son was on the level, was on an NBA level, and was most likely going to get drafted, he has consistently in interviews said he wants to do it. And look, he's not going to play with his son for 2 or 3 years if his son gets drafted by Orlando. So I think that his future and his end is going to be tied to Bronny. So I feel like next season, he's still LeBron James championship chaser. He's still looking to win at the highest level. The season after that, regardless of what happens with the Lakers, I think most likely you're seeing him go to wherever Bronny is, and that will be his unofficial farewell tour.
Gotcha. All right, let's say farewell to that story, because if they're Nuggets fans or just people who are tired of LeBron listening to this or watching this right now, they're like, damn it. This is what we're talking about. Like, y'all just spent the first 20 minutes of this podcast talking about the loser, the guy that got swept. What about the Denver Nuggets? What about they are the story and should be the story. And I love to know, and you wrote about them this morning for SI, but I love to get into the fact that, like, they're so complete and so connected. Is it just a result of them staying the course? Because one of the fascinating aspects of their journey is it's very old school. They took their lumps. They had some bad injury luck, specifically with Jamal Murray. They had some heartbreaking defeats. They had a player win MVPs and not, win the conference finals MVP award now, the Magic Johnson Award in Western Conference now. And here they are. Michael Malone's got tenure. I think only Spoelstra, Popovich, and who am I missing? Kerr have been in their positions longer than Michael Malone. The fact that he's lasted as long as he has in today's NBA is a modern miracle. Is this just a testament to the value of persistence and patience?
I think so. It's a testament to drafting well, that's for sure. You look at the way this Nuggets roster was constructed. Nikola Jokic, we all know his story, former second-round pick, but Jamal Murray, a draft pick of this team. Michael Porter Jr., when nobody would touch Michael Porter Jr. because of back issues during his draft year, the Nuggets took a flyer on him in the middle of the first round. That has paid off big time for them. So it goes to show that if you draft well, chances are you are going to have high-level success. But if you are patient, not just with your players, but with your coach. I mean, Michael Malone has been under fire at different points over the last couple of years, but the Nuggets front office, first led by Tim Connelly, now Calvin Booth, has never wavered in its support of him. They believed that he was the right coach for this team. And look, chemistry matters. You look at Miami and what they're doing to Boston right now. That's a team that's been together for a number of years, whether it's Spoelstra, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. The core of that team has been together. This Nuggets team, when you look at them, last 4 or 5 years, they have been the same group. They've grown together. They're in sync with each other. And, look, they've developed a team that, as you heard some Lakers say on Monday night, just doesn't have any holes to it. They've got shooting, they've got rebounding, they've got the best superstar in the game right now, and they play enough defense to get the job done. So, look, I think what it is it shows if you have smart people running your front office and you have a plan and you stick to it, this is what can happen. It's not always easy, and you don't find a Nikola Jokic just anywhere. I mean, that was as much luck as it was anything else. But if you are patient and you are willing to, and I hate to use this phrase, trust the process, but if you're patient, you're going to have an opportunity to build a team like this.
That's one lesson. Another lesson specific to Nikola Jokic, and this is why always, Chris, in any argument or discussion I have about individual greatness, I never reference rings. I hate it. And one of the reasons I hate it is because I look at a Nikola Jokic, who has ascended from 2-time MVP and this season oftentimes disrespected and maligned and underrated 2-time MVP in an effort to anoint somebody, almost like it was almost like a political campaign. Like, how much mud can people throw at him and his track record in order to get another deserving candidate in Joel Embiid elected, all because of what his team had not done or been able to do in the postseason. Because I got to pull up Basketball Reference. I don't remember every postseason game Nikola Jokic has played the last several years since the bubble, but I don't remember Nikola Jokic being the reason why the Nuggets didn't advance in the playoffs. he didn't have the help that he has now. He didn't have a healthy Jamal Murray. He didn't have the team that he has now. He was always this guy. So now it's not like he's a different dude. Flipped the switch and he's become even better. I mean, he's in some ways better, but not substantially better this postseason in order for him to be now seemingly universally being recognized as the best player in the world. Well, part of it is he's one of the few left playing, but it just goes to show it's like he was like, we got to stop judging guys based off what their teams do in the postseason. I know it's where legends are made and reputations are made, but he was no worse a player the last 2 years than he is now.
No, and I think I agree with you that, the ring culture is a wrong way to evaluate, top tier talent. LeBron has a losing record in the finals, but what I look to are the series. What I would consider disappointments are the series where his teams went into the playoffs where you believed that they were going to win a championship, and
when was
they
that?
didn't. And I really like 2011 was probably the only one that I would point to, because they went into that final series against Dallas as the favorite.
No, I'm talking about for Jokic.
They underachieved in that series.
No, I meant for Jokic.
No, there's no. Yeah, but with LeBron, that's the only one of all his finals.
Yeah.
Jokic never had that. You're right. I mean, the bubble year was weird, but they, that didn't. That's fine.
Shoot, even this year,
in 2021,
even as the number 1 seed, how many people looked at him and thought they were going to be the championship team this year?
But this would be the year that if Nikola Jokic had lost in the first round, any criticism he would have received would have been deserving. I don't think he deserved it 2 years ago when the Nuggets had to win the playoffs fresh off a Jamal Murray injury. I don't think he deserved it last year when the Nuggets had, nobody out there. Murray was hurt. Porter Jr. was hurt. They had, I mean, he definitely didn't deserve it last year. This was the year where Nikola Jokic needed to put up or shut up, and he put up. From the opening round on, he was brilliant from start to finish.
Put up one-legged three-pointers.
I just he's throwing behind his head. He's pulling the ball back from. I mean, he made some absolutely absurd shots in this series. 4 or 5 of them, 2 in Game 4, but 4 or 5 of them overall. Look, he more than validated himself as a top-tier player. And I always found it kind of funny that when people were making the Jokic-Joel Embiid comparison, they often said Jokic's game wouldn't hold up in the playoffs the way Embiid's would. Well, Jokic, even before this, had been to a conference finals, whereas Joel Embiid had not. And now Jokic set into an NBA finals, and it's largely because of what he's been able to do on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, it was all like, oh, you analytics nerds, you're looking at numbers. Like, no, we're watching him play, and you're absolutely right. I said this about Embiid. For all the talk, it was like Jokic's lack of postseason success was used against him, but it was never brought up. And I'm not saying it should be, but it was never brought up for Embiid. Bottom line, it's a regular season award. This season was so frustrating, and seeing the Joker get the last laugh is just so heartwarming for me. Also heartwarming for me, Chris, man, and I've told you this, and I'm going to tell you again, I'm going to keep telling you. We go way back. You're just one of my favorite success stories, bro. Like, and I really appreciated getting a shout out. I loved your story last month, Confessions of a Teenage Ball Boy. Like, for those that don't know, Chris Mannix was a locker room attendant at was it the Fleet Center back then? This was the aughts. This was the early aughts.
Started as the Fleet Center, yeah.
Yeah, later TD Garden. I was a young reporter at the Boston Globe, so I'm seeing somebody my age, just this cool-ass dude outside the Celtics locker room. We used to vibe, and you gave me a shout-out from a scoop you gave me back in the day, man. And before I also want to play a little bit of a game with you inspired by that story. But I just love to know, man, and you're such a grinder. And like I said, a legend. It's hard to be you're a two-way player, like a credible voice in 2 sports, both boxing and the NBA. But just like, have you ever just kind of, and I hope you did it when you wrote this story, just kind of stepped back and been like, man, what a long way you've come from being a gopher, as you called it, for NBA players, and hooking me up with stories, to breaking your own stories for Sports Illustrated.
It's been a ride. And look, that job was one of the best high school and college jobs you could ever have, not just because of the social aspect where you made a couple $100 every single night and players often would let you follow them to the bars. after games and put you on their tab, which I did a few times, too many times maybe, in all those years in Boston. But it certainly helped me as I was trying to get into the media business. I mean, I had the benefit of knowing what I wanted to do at a very, very early age. Even before the Celtics stuff, my uncle was Kevin Mannix, who was a longtime beat writer for the Patriots, for the Boston Herald. So I grew up, reading his stuff in the paper every day and spending holidays, listening to him tell stories about what was going on the Patriots beat. Later on, as more writers got into television radio, listening to him on WEEI on weekends talk about the game. So I just gravitated towards that immediately. And when I got into the ball boy gig, doing the stuff with the Celtics, you initially get into it, you're just kind of doing your thing. But as I got to like a college age, I started to realize it could be a useful tool, both in developing relationships with other writers like yourself at that time. Ian Thompson was someone I was very close with over the years, Jackie McMullen as well. And part of doing that was occasionally like, hey, Mike, you might want to ask Rafer Alston about a beef he had with Jerry Stackhouse at halftime. Or, hey, Ian, I just saw Larry Brown congratulating Allen Iverson on something. You may want to ask Larry Brown or Allen Iverson about that. Just kind of using whatever tools I had to, to put some stuff out. And look, ultimately it was useful. I mean, Ian Thompson, I'll forever be grateful for him for helping open the door for me at Sports Illustrated. He got me an interview with the higher ups, the fact checking department at SI. I was hired on a short-term deal there and just worked my way up from there over the last 20 years. So the benefit for me going into that job and very early on was I knew what I wanted to do, and I just tried to, harness every tool at my disposal to help me get there.
And I'm not saying like, oh, I knew you'd be this. I'm not saying that, but there was something special about you. I mean that sincerely. Like you just kind of, you did not. I like to tell people, like, dress, contrary to what I'm wearing now, dress for the job you want, not the one you have. And even when I was, in my early 20s and at the Boston Globe, people would look at me in the Patriots press box because I'd be in a suit. I never wanted anybody to look at me and see intern or see young guy. Same with you. Like I didn't look at you and see a teenager or somebody in his early 20s in college. I saw a dude that just kind of like walked around like he knew what he was doing. He knew what he wanted. And this was like, hey, I'm a part of this organization. You weren't in, and we'll get to some of these stories in a second. You weren't in awe of just being around the players, even though I know you appreciated it. You knew you had a job to do and you were about your business, and it's why people trusted you. And refresh my memory, you were also a Nighthawk while you were at BC. Weren't you at the Globe too with me? Like, because you were hustling. You were always working. You were always improving your resume. How long were you at the Globe as well? Refresh my memory.
Yeah, probably 2.5 years working as a Nighthawk. And for people that don't know what that means, that's basically this is pre-internet, really.
Right.
When you're sitting on the desk and you're fielding phone calls from high school and local college coaches who are giving you final scores of their games and recaps of their games, which you then feed to the agate desk, and it would wind up in the paper the next day. It also gave me an opportunity early on to get bylines, which, as you know, were invaluable to someone our age back then. I mean, whenever someone would ask, can any one of you guys go write a 300-word piece on the girls' golf team in Western Massachusetts, I'd be the first one to put my hand up and hop in my crappy Toyota Corolla and drive to Worcester or Springfield or wherever it was they were sending me to do that stuff. So that was, I was fortunate enough to be able to get that position while I was in college. And it was another thing that I made sure that I milked the absolute most of while I was there.
Yep. And that's another, so my first internship at the Boston Globe, I did 2 summers. When Don Squar, when I did my exit interview and he invited me back for the next summer, the thing he pointed to was not how well I wrote something or, scoops or whatever. It was like, on my off day, he sent me to cover the Little League World Series in Bristol, Connecticut, coincidentally. And I was like, you got it. And so that hustle, man, I always saw that in you as well. So I'm not going to steal all the thunder.
You gotta hustle. You gotta. I mean, that's 99. Look, there are many better writers than me, especially at my magazine, where I still think there are some of the best writing sports stories. But where I tried early on to separate was to just be a grinder. And I remember early on in the internet days when I was fact checking at SI, you didn't get a lot of opportunities. I mean, I was on the depth chart. I was behind, from a basketball perspective, behind some all-time greats. Jack McCallum, Hall of Famer, Ian Thompson, brilliant. Chris Ballard, still one of the best writers in all of sports writing. He was on the NBA beat at that time. John Wertheim was doing a lot of NBA stuff at that time. Where there were opportunities were writing web content. And at that point, nobody really wanted to write for the web. I would just kind of write stuff up and email it to Paul Fichtenbaum, who at the time was running SI.com, and say, hey, will you take this? Can you take this? And eventually I started taking more and more. And I started to develop a regular presence on the internet, which helped me, establish kind of a footprint at SI early on. So to your point, it is as much about the hustle and as much about our willingness to work relentlessly and at times almost around the clock, 7 days a week, that leads to the most success in these jobs.
I encourage everybody to go back and look up Confessions of a Teenage Ball Boy on SI.com. You had some stories in there, man, from, I don't need to tell them here, they can go read them, but Oakley, Jordan, Bird, Ray Allen, and me. I'm obviously in that pantheon, right? But it's like, any stories that didn't make it? Like, did you hold it that you can share with me? Like, I'm sure you got more than that.
Yeah, there are more, but there's so like when I was debating what to put in the article, like some of it, there was one. I'm not going to name the player, but there was one.
This is already a good one.
There was one player that. There was one player. I'll give you two right here. There's one player that after a game, it was a very high-profile player. There was a tough loss for their team. And I was working the visiting locker room at that time, as I worked for most of the last few years. There was one player that said to me, "I need you to go get me like a bottle of whiskey." Like, usually get beer, requests. A bottle of whiskey felt like a lot.
It was hard.
So I go out, I get the bottle, I come back, give it to him. The next morning, and probably the afternoon at that time, I read in the local paper down there, an LexisNexis search or something, that's what we were doing back then. I read in a local paper that this player was arrested for DUI the next morning when he got back. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, not only is it bad for him, but is there going to be blowback on me? Like, am I going to be the
absolutely.
guy? Am I an accessory to a DUI? And at that point, you just wonder. So on a more lighthearted one and I don't want to name this guy again because I know I actually thought about putting this in the article, but then I Googled him to check on his marital status, and I found out he was either married at the time or still married now. But there was one player that every time he came into town, he was always looking to hook up, always looking to meet someone in the crowd. Yeah. He was not the best looking player. Let's just put it that way. So he would say to me like, "Hey, there's a girl in section 17, row 5. See if you can get her number." So I would go walking up into the stands and I would say, "Hey, such and such wants your phone number." They would look at the bench and look at him and go, "No." So I would come back and they'd be like, "She said no." So like 5 minutes later, this player would find another girl up in the stands and go, "Hey, section 22, row 6, whatever. Go ask her for a number." And then there I go, marching up the stands again, asking for a phone number. Like 90% of the time, the women would look at this guy and be like, "We're going to pass. We're going to pass."
Was he playing? Maybe it's because he was too busy. Was he on the bench the whole game?
No, he was. He was a reserve. Let's put it that way. He was a reserve, and I don't think at that time he was playing.
Unattractive reserve. Man. Sorry, that's not who they're there for.
He was an unattractive. He was an unattractive reserve. And he would I'm telling you, it was 3 or 4 times until someone would say yes, basically, until one of the women would say yes. And I'd keep doing it because at the end of the day, if I got a phone number, that usually meant I got $50 in my pocket. So in a way, I was a pimp for in that moment. I'm trying to hook him up with women that are in the stands. It would just be funny. Whenever he come to town, I knew I'd be marching up and down that lower bowl, trying to find women for him to go out with.
I'm gonna start calling Chris Mannix Gator. No, man, like it's just the Iverson story. Jordan, you telling Jordan he sucked. I mean, it's just priceless stuff. So I want to play a little bit.
The better one was the better one was the Charles Oakley story. Like the Iverson one gets a lot of attention because I got him beer and he, there's a whole story behind that people can read about. The Oakley one was actually funnier, like because that was Oakley's second go round with the Bulls when they were really bad, and Tim Floyd was the head coach, and they had just been obliterated by the Celtics. And Oakley, I don't even know if he played in that game. He was kind of checked out at that point. He says to me, "Can you go to McDonald's and get me, $100 worth of food, basically, just piles of food to bring out?" So I go get the food. I come back and I take the food. He says, "Take it on the bus, seat 7, whatever it is." So I get on the bus and I'm walking toward the seat. And I walk past Jerry Krause, at the time the general manager of the Bulls. And Jerry looks at me and goes, "Who the F is that for?" And I kind of stop. I go, "Charles Oakley, it's for him. He said to put it on this seat." He says, "Get it off the bus." So I take it off the bus. And so I'm walking back towards the locker room, and Oakley is coming towards the bus. So Oakley goes, "What are you doing?" "I told you to put it on the bus." I go, "Jerry said I can't leave it on the bus." So Oakley takes the bags and he walks within maybe 10 to 15 feet of the bus, and he opens up a folding chair and he sits in the chair and Jerry's sitting there in the window. In front of the window, he's eating the McDonald's. He sits there it's probably 10, 15 minutes before he finishes the McDonald's. And he sat there and ate the entire time. It was so funny that Tim Floyd, who was the coach at the time, I think he was kind of checked out too. Tim Floyd actually walked past Oak, and he sat down next to him, and he had some of the food while they were eating. So the whole thing was.
It feels like Last Dance-ish. It's like, hey, this is for MJ.
It was crazy. I'll give you one more of that I didn't put in there. Dikembe Mutombo. I'll throw him under the bus for this one. Like Dikembe Mutombo was with Atlanta, I think, and. So like I'm in the visiting locker room and the players are gone and they're cleaning up and I'm cleaning up and I look at Mutombo's locker and I see his wallet on the top shelf and it's wrapped up. And I'm like, oh damn. So I grab the wallet and I start chasing the bus down the ramp. Like the bus is basically on Causeway Street, which is the street outside the TD Garden, about to head towards the airport. When I catch up to the bus, I'm banging on the side of it. I'm knocking on it and I get to the bus and the bus driver opens the door and I get in there and I say, "Dikembe, you left your wallet there." Now, I am anticipating one of the highest paid players in the NBA to open up his wallet and give me something out of it.
Right, little tip.
Not so much. He gave me a handshake and a thanks man and sent me on my way. So, Dikembe, you're a great guy. You've done some great things off the court, but in that moment, you were not my favorite player. That's for sure.
That's hustle for you right there. That's good stuff, man. I want to play a quick game with you before I get you out of here, because you were a fly on the wall then, and naturally you're an insider now. So I want to go into a couple of locker rooms that seem to have a little drama, a little tension inside of them, almost rapid fire style, and kind of give me your quick take on the state of these locker rooms / franchises and where they go from here. Starting naturally with Boston. Just something seems a little off about that group, wouldn't you say?
Something's off, that's for sure. And I don't think this team ever really got over the exit of Ime Udoka. The circumstances around his exit are still something that players don't feel like they have enough clarity to it. And it's been frustrating for the players in that locker room to have gone through what they went through last year with Ime Udoka, to see him kind of unceremoniously fired for having an improper relationship with a team employee. And then seeing other teams think so little of his transgression that they are immediately trying to hire him. Brooklyn during the start of the season and Houston immediately after. I think that's something that the players have not really gotten over. But I think the bigger problem with the Celtics is not the fact that Joe Mazzulla is the coach. It's that Joe Mazzulla has not had his coaching staff fleshed out the way it's needed to be. There is no former head coach on that staff. Look, Ime Udoka, for all his greatness as a coach, he had Will Hardy on his staff. He had Damon Stoudemire on his staff. Joe Mazzulla ascended to that head coaching position, and Ime Udoka's brain power wasn't replaced. Will Hardy's brain power wasn't replaced. Damon Stoudemire left at midseason. He wasn't replaced. The inability of the Celtics to add to that staff. And I know they tried. They reached out to Frank Vogel and tried to get him to join the staff before the start of the season. Frank declined for many reasons. The inability for them to do that, I think, is costing them in these playoffs.
So you don't see him getting fired should they, when they inevitably bow to the Heat, you don't see it?
It's possible. Look, we've seen a lot of coaches, top coaches, fired for seemingly a lot less. But one thing you have to remember about Joe Mazzulla is that he is the closest thing that Brad Stevens has to a protege. I mean, Brad Stevens hired him out of Division III college basketball and put him on his bench. He made sure that Ime Udoka retained Joe Mazzulla when Udoka took that job a couple of years ago. He and Wick Grousbeck, the owner, prevented Joe Mazzulla from joining Will Hardy's staff in Utah after Will Hardy got the job. And Joe Mazzulla, despite having significantly less experience than guys like Damon Stoudemire and Ben Sullivan and other guys on that bench, he was the one Brad Stevens tabbed to replace Udoka last fall. So I think there's a lot of loyalty from Brad Stevens when it comes to Joe Mazzulla. That's why I think it's not as cut and dry as Joe Mazzulla paying the price at the end of the season.
Gotcha. Philadelphia.
They're between a rock and a hard place, because if they pay James Harden a 4-year close to max level deal, which is probably what it's going to cost, they immediately have the most untradeable contract in the NBA, because James Harden, despite the fact that he's still playing at close to an all-star level, is a depreciating asset. We saw that in the playoffs. He had a couple of great games, and he had a lot of clunkers in this postseason. But if they don't re-sign Harden, they'll go into next season without a player of his caliber, because you can't replace him, and they'll be without the draft capital that they used to acquire James Harden. So they're in a precarious position. The real question is, are the Rockets dumb enough to give James Harden that max deal? Like, this James Harden story to Houston, it remains in the water supply. I had a conversation with 2 executives on Monday night who told me they believe Harden's going to Houston. I can't, for the life of me, figure out why. Like, you have got a young team, a team that has some good talent. Jalen Green, really good. Jabari Smith, really good. Alperen Sengun, tremendous draft pick. And they've got the 4th pick in the draft to add to that mix.
That's not the veteran influence you want. Not that
veteran, exactly. Is the veteran influence the guy that, in part, wants to go back to Houston because they let him do whatever the hell he wants? They let him go to Cabo for a couple of days. They let him disappear to Vegas. They let him have the run of the show down there. Is that the guy you want to tie yourself to over a 4-year deal? For the life of me, and I tweeted this out, like, if the Rockets do that, then Adam Silver should seize control of the franchise, should do what David Stern did with the Pelicans years ago. Adam Silver should run that team, because that would be a catastrophic decision for the Houston Rockets.
You ain't lying. Speaking of not being able to get over stuff that happened earlier in the year, state of the locker room in the franchise for the Golden State Warriors.
The locker room a little bit tricky. There's still tension between Draymond Green and Jordan Poole, but whereas, 6 months ago, I would have said it would be Draymond that winds up being the guy cut loose. I think if they make a major change, and they're probably going to be major changes, if they make a major change, it's probably going to involve Jordan Poole. I think Draymond regained the trust of that locker room in the second half of the season. Took him a while and took him a lot of conversations and a lot of proving himself. But I think Draymond regained the trust of most of the players in that locker room. And Jordan Poole showed in the postseason he's not as valuable as Draymond. Even at this stage of his career, Draymond remains a high-level defensive player, the hub of what they do offensively. There are going to be roster moves within the Warriors this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Poole is among them.
Couple more. Phoenix.
You know, I sat in Matt Ishbia's office like a week after he took the job in Phoenix. And I asked him, was there any risk to this Durant deal? And he looked me in the eye and said, no risk. Well, the reality is there was major risk. And this was the risk that Chris Paul would get injured, that DeAndre Ayton would get injured, and that they wouldn't be able to be the team they look like on paper. And then they go into next year with Kevin Durant a year older, with Chris Paul a year older, and be a little less likely to make a run. Now, I still think the Suns, with one transaction cycle to add to the roster and one full training camp to get these guys acclimated with each other, they've still got a shot at winning a championship. I think Kevin Durant has proven he is going to age pretty well. But to me, it's 50-50 right now, whether this team goes on to win a championship or this situation blows up and becomes one of those trades that sets a franchise back for years.
Last but not least, and this could be a whole podcast, and it has been a whole podcast unto itself, the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah. Look, the Ja Morant is going to miss a chunk of games next year. It just, you know, how strongly Adam Silver comes down on him is the open question. A lot of people I talk to in the NBA believe this is going to be a half a season suspension because the NBA believes it got played to a degree. The NBA believes it got sandbagged. The NBA believes that in March, I was going to say last something, it was just in March. In March, the NBA believes they showed Ja Morant some compassion, that they bought into his comments about
they bought his
mental
bullshit.
Health issues.
Yeah.
You're trying to tiptoe around it, but they did.
No,
they bought into that. And look, they gave him an 8-game suspension, which is not insignificant, but it really was a 2-game suspension because he was already out for the previous 6 games.
Yeah.
And it was retroactive, correct? So I don't think the NBA is going to be as lenient as they were this time around. I think a 25-ish game suspension is automatic, and most people I talk to are of the belief this could reach 40 games or beyond. The NBA kind of showed Ja Morant the carrot last time. Now it's time for the stick. You know, if Ja Morant didn't learn his lesson after last season and all the backlash he got, if he didn't learn his lesson from losing out on a $40 million, that's what it cost him to not make one of those All-NBA teams, which was entirely linked to what he did with that gun. It wasn't the numbers. It was the off-the-court stuff that prevented him from making that team. If that didn't cause him to learn his lesson and he was out there less than 2 months later doing the exact same thing, I think the NBA is going to say, look, let's see how you feel after we take away half your season. And everything Memphis does, you know, from there is entirely based on what the NBA's reaction is going to be.
Dude, this has been so much fun. I know it was a late night. You're on the West Coast. I can't wait to hear what comes out of exit interviews with the Lakers. I know you'll be there. We'll talk to you again soon about that. I'll obviously be following your tweets and your writing. Keep up the great work, man. What's it like being a movie star, bro? Tell me what it's like being Michael B. Jordan's co-star.
First of all, it was awesome, and I thank Michael B. Jordan every time I see him. The couple of times I see him, he's a big NBA fan. He's at a lot of games. For that opportunity to do it. It was surreal being on that set. I mean, you know, I'd done something like that before. I'd been on that movie set of Real Steel, which was this robot boxing movie from way back in the day, but didn't really have any kind of speaking role in that. But having a speaking role where, you know, Michael gives you the script. He was director, of course, of the movie. He gives you the script, but to his credit, is like, look, I want this film to sound as authentic as I want it to look. So if you're reading this page and you're saying this is not what I would say during a broadcast, do something different, say something different. And we did that. We went out and Todd Grisham and I kind of rewrote parts of the script and tried to make it as authentic as possible. And I do appreciate Michael B. Jordan for both having us on that set and allowing us to try to make it as authentic as we possibly could.
Dude, no lie, your life and career is pretty much a movie, Chris. Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for coming and kicking with me. My main man, Chris Mannix.
You got
All
it.
right, brother. Take care.